Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream stars four completely different groups of characters. First up, there's the older generation, including the Duke of Athens, his fiancée, and a raging father. Next to appear in the play are four young, well-to-do lovers, ensnared by their overlapping desires and passions. The third group are ordinary workmen, including a man called not Bum or Buttock, but Bottom. The final group we meet are from the supernatural world, which, like its human equivalent, has its own hierarchy, and so includes a king and a queen, called Oberon and Titania. It is obvious that these four groups contrast enormously with each other. However, the theme of contrast is important in A Midsummer Night's Dream, not just because of the diversity and range of its characters, but because of the contrasting relationships, feelings, perceptions and experiences within each group. So stay tuned. Let's explore Shakespeare's use of contrast within A Midsummer Night's Dream. This is Schofield on Shakespeare. The opening to A Midsummer Night's Dream seems one of peace and harmony. We are introduced to the Duke of Athens, Theseus, and his fiancée, Hippolyta, Queen of the Amazons. They are to be married in a mere 4 days. However, closer analysis reveals a contrast between this image of apparently blissful stability and past actions. Theseus openly admits, "I won thy love, doing thee injuries," before going on to claim, "But I will wed thee in another key, with pomp, with triumph, and with revelling." So there was no diplomacy, no gentle wooing in Theseus' courtship of Hippolyta, merely violence, the use of his sword, and a resultant triumph. Hippolyta does seem content now, but another contrast between the couple emerges in their different perceptions of time. Theseus thinks the time will drag before their wedding. How slow this old moon wanes. She lingers my desires like to a stepdame or a dowager, long withering out a young man's revenue. The personification of the moon gives it more power, in this case to make Theseus wait for the sexual gratification permitted for the man within marriage. The simile compares this period of frustrated waiting to that experienced by a son of a recently deceased father of fortune. The son is entitled to inherit his father's estate, but must wait until his father's, possibly young, second wife dies, and watch as she gleefully lives a life of frivolous extravagance, thus diminishing his own future inheritance. This simile highlights Theseus's extreme frustration, but also sexual desire for Hippolyta. In contrast, his betrothed believes the opposite, not that time will drag, but that it will pass rapidly. She breezily reassures her panting husband-in-waiting, 4 days will quickly steep themselves in night. 4 nights will quickly dream away the time. Moreover, there are no cynical similes for Hippolyta to describe her feelings about this period of time. Instead, she declares that the moon will be benign rather than inhibitive. It will be like to a silver bow new bent in heaven. So the moon will figuratively have a bow pulled back, ready to let fly an arrow to bless their sexual union. Whereas Theseus' simile is negative and alive to the pessimistic realities of family life, Hippolyta's imagery is poetic and beautiful. So the opening exchanges give a hint about the important role contrast will have in the play. On the one hand, Theseus and Hippolyta seem a respectful, dignified couple, yet we find out that they used to be enemies, and with their wedding in 4 days, they have a completely contrasting perspective on time, with the man, as is to be stereotypically expected from the apparently more lustful sex, the one desperate to consummate, the female far calmer. And with the entrance of Hermia, Lysander and Demetrius, Shakespeare continues his theme of contrasting perspectives, but this time it relates to the choosing of partners rather than time. Aegeus plays the furious father who has decreed that his daughter Hermia should marry Demetrius, and lambasts Lysander for how he has bewitched the bosom of my child. The verb bewitched is reminiscent of Brabantio's racist rant against Othello in the play of the same name, who he believes has enchanted his own daughter Desdemona. Both words suggest that the unwelcome prospective son-in-law has used foul means to win their daughter's love, and have connotations of evil witchcraft which should be utterly condemned. Aegeus's detailed tirade continues when he declares, "By moonlight at her window Lysander sang, with feigning voice verses of feigning love, and stolen the impression of her fantasy, with bracelets of thy hair, rings, gauds, conceit, knacks, trifles, nosegays, sweetmeats." The scorn is apparent in Aegeus's words as he puns on feigning, to first suggest that Lysander's voice is sickly sweet, and then to suggest that he is putting on these feelings of love. He remorselessly de-romanticizes the notion of giving gifts to a loved one by listing them disdainfully together, declaring that such items have stolen Hermia's judgment and left her vulnerable to his deceitful advances. Knacks is a contemptuous shortening of knick-knacks, which are small, insignificant decorative objects for a house, whilst gauds are showy toys and conceits are fancy articles. These nouns all emphasise the superficiality of Lysander's supposed gestures, as the gifts themselves may look pretty, but are utterly useless from a practical, long-term point of view, like his own amorous advances. Aegeus and Theseus, to a lesser extent, represent the rigidity of the older generation, traditional, controlling, inflexible. And Shakespeare contrasts this with the desires of youth and their wish for self-determination. Hermia hints at this when she responds to Theseus's request for her to obey her father with, "I would my father looked but with my eyes." This line highlights the difference in perspective between Hermia and Aegeus, how the elder is completely unable or unwilling to view things from the younger's point of view, and this brings the pair into conflict. As the scene continues, Lysander heightens the tension between the younger and the older generations by persisting in arguing his case, in spite of Theseus passing a judgment which declares Hermia must obey her father, die or become a nun. He points out that socially, Demetrius and himself are incredibly similar. "I am, my lord, as well derived as he, as well possessed. My love is more than his. My fortune every way is fairly ranked, if not with vantage, as Demetrius." But there is little or no room for negotiation or compromise within this old world order, although Theseus does hint at some behind-the-scenes discussions when he tells Demetrius and Aegeus that he has some private schooling for you both, in which he may ask them to consider the wisdom of them insisting upon a match which may only result in strife. This is mere speculation though, and publicly Hermia is left with three incredibly contrasting options. Either the perceived pinnacle of a woman's life, marriage, death, or sexual abstinence. So far we've explored Shakespeare's use of contrast in perspective, the views of the older generation contrasted to the views of the younger, as well as the contrast between the present and the past. However, Shakespeare also uses contrast in the form of antithesis to imply heightened emotion and confusion. Left alone on stage, Hermia and Lysander bewail their fates and attempt to reassure themselves that the course of true love never did run smooth, or that the very finest lovers have always had problems to overcome. They take it in turns to comment on the different problems that occur between generalised true lovers. Lysander suggests that lovers can be thwarted due to being different in blood, before Hermia interrupts with, "O cross, too high to be enthralled to low." Lysander then continues his ponderings by suggesting lovers can be misgrafted in respective years, and Hermia once again interjects, "O spite, too old to be engaged too young." On the one hand, Hermia's use of antithesis shows her frustration towards attitudes that prevent higher class people being brought together with lower class folk, or older people being wed to younger. Her antithesis also brings to mind Juliet's despair at the apparent impossibility of her own true love relationship in Romeo and Juliet, when she cries out in frustration, "My only love sprung from my only hate, too early, soon unknown, and known too late." However, whereas the audience engages far more with Romeo and Juliet's tragic fate, the rigid structure and artificiality of Hermia's exchanges with Lysander. In each one, Lysander begins with either or before Hermia interrupts with an explanation, followed by use of antithesis, contrasts with the supposedly unbound passion and frustration they are feeling. The poetic structures are beautiful to listen to and emphasise the pair's elevated status in society. However, they also limit the audience's emotional involvement in the couple's suffering. We remain relatively detached to their despair, particularly as Shakespeare conjures up a convenient aunt figure that is liberal and affectionate enough to marry them, far away from the sharp Athenian law. Incidentally, there is nothing like a convenient aunt-uncle figure for easy use in a Shakespearean plot. Think of Rosaline and her old religious uncle in As You Like It, for example, to explain away her unusually refined accent to a slightly suspicious Orlando. It is not just Hermia who used antithesis artificially to reflect on love. Helena, desperately in love with the same Demetrius who wants to marry Hermia, gets in on the act to highlight the irrational unfairness of love. Hermia marvels, "I frown upon Demetrius, yet he loves me still." Before Helena sighs, "Oh, that your frowns would teach my smiles such skill." The girls continue their linguistic set piece with Hermia despairing, "I give him curses, yet he gives me love." For which Helena's response is, "Oh, that my prayers could such affection move." Just as Hermia's earlier rumination with Lysander about the different circumstances in which true love is thwarted largely leaves the audience cold, so here we struggle to sympathise enormously with Helena as her language follows such a contrived, albeit pleasing structure. She begins with "oh" and picks up on one of Hermia's words to create her own antithesis, for example, frowns and smiles. What really needles Helena is that she treats Demetrius so lovingly, and yet the more loving she is, the crueler he behaves towards her. "The more I love, the more he hateth me." Shakespeare uses contrast here to highlight the unfairness and arbitrariness of love. Love is a powerful, illogical force that we have no control of, and as a result it is as likely to bring the antithetical force of pain as it is pleasure. Love also has the power to transform not just your views of other people, but your perception of your own environment. Hermia reveals, "Before the time I did Lysander see, seemed Athens as a paradise to me." So Hermia, unmarked by the passions of love, used to feel that Athens was biblical-esque perfection. Look at how this vision contrasts to her current feelings. "Oh then, what graces in my love do dwell, that he hath turned the heaven unto a hell." So love, generally considered a wonderful source of contentment and joy, let alone the source for all new life, has ironically resulted in her now seeing Athens as a hell, a place of mere suffering and destruction. So just within the first scene of the play, Shakespeare uses contrast in so many different ways for dramatic effects. He contrasts Theseus and Hippolyta's views about time, Aegeus and Theseus's dogmatic views about the rights of the father to determine the fate of a daughter, with Hermia and Lysander's opposite opinions. He uses contrasting images in individual utterances to suggest emotional intensity and also to highlight the irrational power of love. It is frequently not dependent on kind actions, but consists of merely powerful random impulses hidden inexplicably within a person's heart. Shakespeare also uses contrast to show how love can transform the way you view home and hearth. It produces emotions that move far beyond the confines of two people and instead spiral out of control, resulting in, for example, your hometown changes from a heaven unto a hell.